I went off the birth control pill a few years ago. I had been taking it more than 8 years at that point, and more and more research started to get out what it actually does to your body and how you do not have a real cycle when you're on the pill, how the bleeding you have is not a real period bleed, and all these things where I was like, okay, I don't want it anymore, I'm gonna stop it. Going into this completely naively because I thought, yeah, my period is just gonna come back and everything's gonna be great. And that was not the case because my period just did not come back. And month after month went by, nothing happened. In the beginning, I wasn't that worried because I thought, yeah, probably just take some time. That's normal. My body needs to adjust. And then after a few months, I actually really started to completely freak out because I started to learn more and more about the cycle and realizing just what a strong sign it is when you do not have your period. It's kind of like really your body telling you that something is completely off here, because our cycle is basically the least priority for our body in terms of survival, because reproduction has absolutely no priority when all the body wants to do is just stay alive. It's so crazy to think about that. That's then just the first thing the body starts to shut off is your reproductive hormones and organs. That's really when I started to dive so deep into that whole topic of, first of all, of course, how can I get my cycle back? And then once I did get it back, which I'm going to tell you in more detail in this episode, after 9 months, I got it back, but it was so crazy irregular. And so in the last years, I have literally really tried everything, researched everything on how I can balance my cycle. First of all, of course, again, because it is such an important sign of health, but also because my biggest dream in life is being a mom. And so, especially during that time where I didn't have my cycle at all, it primarily stressed me out so much because I was so worried about my fertility. And I was really like, oh my God, is there something wrong with me? Can I maybe not get pregnant? And that's really kind of the main driving force behind it for me personally. And what's so interesting to me is that looking back now, I can clearly see that I did everything wrong. It's really no wonder that I didn't have my period back then and that it didn't come back. So in this week's episode, I want to share with you the 10 most powerful things to balance your hormones, to regain your cycle if you've lost your cycle, and to regulate it. And I would say we should really start right away with the first one. And knowledge in this field, in my opinion, is just really a superpower, because knowing these things changed absolutely everything. It changed my health, my well-being, how I look, how I feel. And the very first point is a little bit obvious, but it is to gain a very clear understanding about the cycle and to track your cycle. I think it's crazy that I had absolutely no idea how my cycle actually works when I went off the pill, because I think it was just so normal to be on the pill. I think it was really this time, or I was still in this generation where prescribing the pill was the most natural thing to do, where you didn't question it, where again, there wasn't also as much research about it. And so I was on it for so many years, really having no idea what a normal cycle actually feels like, what it looks like. And I just want to give you a very quick overview of our cycle and how it works. And it starts with day 1, which is our period bleed. So that's kind of the day we start counting. And that's kind of like our reset phase, because there both our estrogen and our progesterone, which are kind of the two most powerful female hormones for our cycle, those are very low at that point, which also means that our energy usually isn't that high. We're also more introspective. But what's really interesting is that our hemispheres in the brain, so the left and the right hemispheres, are more connected during that time. And that means that we're more reflective and intuitive. So this is kind of really the perfect time to pause, to look inwards and kind of process. Then the next phase starts, usually around cycle day 6 to 13, but this is super individual, of course, but that's kind of roughly the time frame. And this is kind of like the rise and our total glow up week, because what happens in the body is that our estrogen rises super much. And estrogen is really this hormone that makes us feel and look amazing. It makes us creative, outgoing. So this is really the time to do all the challenging things, maybe creative stuff, maybe something that puts you more out of your comfort zone. So really challenging ourselves there. And what I really find so crazy is, especially in terms of looks, I notice such a difference how I look during that phase, especially in my hair. I swear to you, I feel like however I style my hair, it always looks a million times better during that phase. Also, my roots don't get that oily. My skin is also much better. And yeah, it's just crazy what a difference it makes. And I'm sure if you're maybe already tracking your cycle, you're also already very aware of this stage. It's just really, you feel like Superwoman and just invincible and super ambitious. And it makes total sense also because estrogen increases our serotonin and also our dopamine receptors. And what's also super fascinating is that research found that our hippocampus, so the area in the brain that's responsible for memory and learning, that produces more gray matter during that time. So it's also an amazing time to learn something new and really expose yourself to new things. And now we're reaching our peak ovulation, usually around day 14 to 16. And this is literally our brain in its best possible capacity. We feel magnetic, we feel super confident, like everything is just really at its top. Estrogen is peaking at that point. So this is the moment in the month where we're at our absolute best. We feel energized, we feel great. So anything during that glow up week is maximized at that point in time. And then the shift happens after a rise. Of course, there needs to be a fall. That's our luteal phase. So after ovulation, we enter this phase from around cycle day 17 to 30, where estrogen goes super low and progesterone rises. And progesterone is this hormone that makes us just feel a lot more less energetic, a lot more tired, a lot more introspective. So this is definitely the time where we want to prioritize rest, where we don't want to go all in with stuff, and where we want to try as best as we can to adjust our life to this. So not planning big social events or huge new projects or anything like that. Also, where we want to remind ourselves that it's so normal not to feel that motivated anymore and feel a lot slower, and also maybe not feel super great in your body at that point of time. It's crazy how loud the voice in our head can get, especially during those days, and how hard we can be ourselves and talk ourselves down, especially when we just felt so great. And then it's really like, okay, what just happened? I was just really at the top. I felt amazing. Things were going so well. And then all of a sudden it's the complete opposite. And it can just be so super frustrating. And what research also shows is that our prefrontal cortex gets less responsive during the luteal phase, which means that we're less able to emotionally regulate ourselves. So it's a lot harder to kind of like keep our emotions on track or regulate ourselves. So it's also super normal to feel more sensitive during that time, to maybe have some emotional outbursts or breakdowns or whatever. That is completely normal and something where I so think we need to be so much kinder to ourselves, or definitely I know that for myself, to really be like, it doesn't say anything about what you're capable of, just really trying your best with what you have and kind of the amount of energy you have, which just is a lot lower during that time. And so being so much kinder to ourselves, I think is really super crucial during that time. But so if you're not tracking your cycle yet, I highly recommend it. And my favorite way to track it is with the Oura Ring. So this is not an Oura advertisement at all. Genuinely, I think it's the easiest method to track your temperature because it just happens automatically. I mean, you could, of course, also do it with a thermometer, but that's just definitely a little bit more tricky and prone to not as accurate results because you have to do it the exact moment you wake up before getting out of bed and anything. It's also so easy to forget. And I just think it's so practical that it tracks it automatically. I can see it in the app because then you can see a very clear pattern of your follicular phase, so the first half of the cycle where our temperature is lower. And then once we ovulated, the temperature rises. So it's also a way to confirm ovulation, which I think is just super practical. And it actually also takes a few other measures into consideration, like your resting heart rate or your heart rate variability, which also changes during the cycle, and then kind of can give you a quite precise indicator of when you ovulated and where you are in your cycle. But there's, of course, also so many other tracking apps, which are then just kind of tracking based on your history. So when you ovulated last and how long your cycle usually is. So if you do have a very regular cycle, that's probably enough. But definitely for anyone like me who's struggling with irregular cycles, I think this is super, super helpful to have. Now, moving on to point number 2, definitely one of the biggest, most impactful changes I made is to focus on my circadian rhythm and in general, having fixed rhythms and routines in my life, specifically a fixed sleep schedule. So going to bed, waking up at the same time, which doesn't just have amazing benefits for our cycle, but actually for our overall health. And it's one of the best ways to regulate our circadian rhythm, which is one of the most responsible things for our hormones. Our hormones literally rely on our circadian rhythm, or actually our hypothalamus, which is the area in the brain that kind of regulates our hormones, that relies on the circadian rhythm, because without that, it doesn't really know when to release the hormones. But if we have a very regulated circadian rhythm, then our cortisol is being released in the morning, which is a completely normal thing that happens, a very good thing that happens. So that rises in the morning and then lowers at night, and then melatonin rises at night. And so the more steady of a rhythm we have, the better the brain is going to release these hormones. Other very powerful things are to get morning sunlight. That's also amazing for our circadian rhythm because, again, it signals the body that it's wake time now. It helps our cortisol to rise. And then in turn, in the evenings, definitely dimming all the lights, especially overhead lights, and as best as possible, removing screens from the phone. I actually started, I think I mentioned that before, I started reading with this red light lamp. Or it's not a red light lamp, but the light is red because it has zero natural normal light. Oh my God, this is a horrible explanation, but I'm going to link the light that I have for you down below. It's from Amazon, and you just clip it on your book. I used to read with a Kindle, but that's still also light exposure. And that way, with that red light, it's one of the best ways to avoid light at night and really calm down. And I am noticing such a strong difference in the time that I fall asleep. I also always do the 4-7-8 breathing technique, just 4 minutes literally at night, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and then exhale for 8. A very proven way to reduce the time it takes to fall asleep. And yeah, just overall, also during the day, I try to stick to fixed things like fixed eating times or certain rituals that I have. And it's so fascinating also how powerful having routines and rhythms is for our mental health, because our body likes predictability, right? And it likes to know when things happen. And this got so clear to me now also through our dog. And it's also something I heard so often, that it's super important for babies as well. So both puppies and babies, they thrive on routines. They need it so much because it just takes out that unpredictability and it makes them feel so much safer, and it helps the body to regulate more because it kind of knows exactly what to do when. Point number 3 has by far been the most important one for me to get my period back, especially because in that phase where I stopped taking the pill and didn't get my period, I was chronically under eating. I was in a phase of my life where I was crazy obsessed with eating healthy and just crazy also obsessed with working out, doing lots of exercise and undernourishing myself so much. I was also going for a lot of runs. I was doing super much cardio and just not nearly eating enough. And that is one of the best ways to lose your period, because if we don't nourish our body, again, what it does is it immediately gets into the state of, oh my God, we're dying. The first thing we're going to shut off is our reproductive hormones because we don't need that, but we're going to use the little fuel that we're getting for everything else to just keep our body going and to stay alive. So no more period, no more reproduction, because yeah, the body feels starved. So the most important change for me was definitely to nourish my body enough. First of all, to never skip meals. Skipping meals is kind of like one of the worst ways to dysregulate our body, especially in terms of our stress and cortisol, because it immediately raises our cortisol. And especially, I think breakfast is one of these meals that gets skipped very easily, or that also, due to different trends that keep emerging, like intermittent fasting, has become this belief that it's good to skip breakfast. but actually for female health, it's not. It's a huge topic in itself. There's also a lot of research starting to emerge finally, because the problem is it's just always been done on men, and for men it can be super beneficial to intermittent fast, but for females, especially during the luteal phase, it's so not good to do. During our follicular phase, it's something that can be beneficial, but I have to say, for me personally, and of course, I think I maybe should have also said this at the beginning, I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to give medical advice. I can only tell you what I learned for myself and what I'm doing for myself. And I do not intermittent fast ever. I always make sure I have a high protein breakfast, because what that also does is it helps so much with balancing our blood sugar. And that's another huge part to help stabilize our period and our hormones, is to focus on blood sugar balance. But I actually don't want to go into it now in full detail, because I already did 2 episodes ago. So you can go to that episode, because there I'm going through all the most powerful things to do to balance our blood sugar. And that would really be my number 1 recommendation for you to learn about if you haven't listened to that episode yet. Really getting into that topic, it's going to make a huge difference. But so making sure we get that high protein breakfast, and then focusing mainly on these 3 things. First of all, healthy fats. Eating enough healthy fats, which are in olive oil, salmon, nuts, seeds, avocados. Then complex carbs. So also really making sure we're getting enough carbs. That's, I feel like, another trend that's been really prominent, right? Is to lower carbs as much as possible, but carbs are super essential for our hormones. What we just want to try and do is focus on the complex ones, right? So not the white bread, anything white is not complex, but the whole grain stuff, right? And with every meal, we want to try that we have these healthy fats, we have a complex carb source, and protein, of course, which is not just super important to balance our blood sugar, but also because it gives our body amino acids, which it needs to build hormones. Because hormones are literally made of protein and fat. By the way, I'm so back at filming recipes. I've been filming so much the last days. It's all going to be on my YouTube. So lots of healthy recipes, high protein recipes, lots of inspiration. So you can find all of that on my main YouTube channel. I'm going to link it for you down below. And now let's talk supplements. Obviously, we want to try to get as many nutrients from our diet, but there are a few supplements that are so beneficial to take for anyone, because of course we are all so individual. And actually that also reminds me that I wanted to say, if you can, I would really highly also recommend to do a blood test to get an overview of your hormones and to just see kind of where you're standing. It's really, really beneficial to do it between cycle day 3 and 5. So basically when you just had your period, and then between day 3 and 5, because that's just where you get the most accurate information. And what I love to do is just, and I don't know if that's a good way to recommend this, but well, whatever, I'll just say it anyways, is that I take the results and just put them into ChatGPT or Claude, one of these AI tools. I know this is going to now open a whole new discussion about sharing your data on AI, but you know, I mean, that's just what I do. And I find it so beneficial, because especially also with female health, it's crazy that you have to take it so much into your own hands. Unless, of course, you have an amazing doctor, ideally maybe a holistic doctor also, who is going to look at the results with you and give you very accurate information on what to do. That's of course the ideal case scenario. But for me, especially in the last years, I cannot tell you to how many doctors I've been and how many doctors I've seen, and where it's just so shocking, the experiences I've made, what I've been told. So often they don't even want to do a blood test. They just say, oh yeah, you have PCOS. That's just what it is. Just go back on the pill. That's what I've been told so many times. And literally, I don't even know what to say to that, because it's just like, wow, okay, that's the solution, really, to go back on the pill. It's just insane. But so yeah, I personally have been using AI and found it really, really helpful. But of course, everyone needs to know for themselves what they share where and so on. But so coming back to the supplements, there are actually 4 specific supplements that I found made a real difference for me. The first one is magnesium, either magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate. So those 2 forms are kind of the best or the most recommended ones. And the thing is, what I thought was so interesting is that women are generally deficient in magnesium, and it supports over 300 enzymatic processes in our body, including hormone production, nervous system regulation, and sleep. And what magnesium does is that it enhances our GABA activity. So GABA is our brain's calming neurotransmitter, and that's why magnesium helps with anxiety, PMS, cramps, and also sleep. And studies prove that magnesium supplementation does reduce PMS symptoms, and it's super good to take it before sleep. So I'm taking it every night. Now, the next one is actually my favorite one, I would say, because it's zinc, and it's not just so good for our hormones, and especially ovulation, but also super nice for our hair, our skin, our nails. And what it also does is it supports our thyroid function, it reduces inflammation, and helps to regulate our testosterone levels. And especially if you are getting off the birth control pill, it's super beneficial to take zinc because the pill depletes our zinc stores in the body. That's also just insane, right? Now, the third one is omega-3, specifically EPA and DHA. And I have been talking about it already many times, so you already know this. It lowers inflammation in our body like nothing else. It's so powerful. And that's just amazing because we know inflammation is then kind of like this thing that then starts to impact everything else. But then it also supports our brain function, helps to regulate our mood, it reduces menstrual pain, and can also help with hormonal acne. Now, the fourth one was another real game changer for me, and that's myo-inositol, which is especially powerful for anyone struggling with PCOS, because when you have PCOS, you're more likely to have blood sugar imbalance, and that is what myo-inositol really helps with, to keep the blood sugar more balanced, to improve our insulin sensitivity, and also to support our ovarian function. And it also has been found to help with anxiety because it modulates serotonin signaling. And I did notice a difference in my mood. I mean, it's always tough to tell especially when you're making a lot of changes at the same time. So I'm sure also other factors maybe played into it. But yeah, there's more and more research actually on myo-inositol, and it's, I think, a really, really fascinating supplement to take. But again, this is all based on my personal research, what I've been doing, what has been helpful to me. So definitely with any supplements, make sure that you base it on your specific situation, getting as much information about it as you can. So taking blood tests, talking to a doctor, and so on. Now let's talk exercise. Point number 5, which is again so interesting for me to look back and realize what a screwed up mindset I actually had about it back then. Because I totally believe that kind of the more you push yourself and the harder you go, the more results you will see, and kind of the better you will feel, the better it also is for your body, because you're really challenging yourself and going to your limits and just doing so much. Also, like overall, the intensity was really way too much what I was doing. I really thought more equals better and healthier. But what it actually equals is more cortisol, more stress, less recovery, more inflammation, especially also if it's not adjusted to the cycle, which is why I truly believe it's so powerful to know where in your cycle you are, so that you can adjust not just actually your exercise, but your whole life as best as possible. Because unfortunately, our life is so not made for the female cycle. It's totally the male cycle, that we're supposed to show up the same every single day because that's what men can do, but we just cannot because we have a monthly cycle, right? So whatever we can control, we want to try to adjust, and exercise is one of these things where, first of all, we want to find a good balance, right? Because but literally with everything in life, too much or too little is not good. And the most powerful change that I did, and I really mean it so much, how big of a change I saw in my cycle regularity, was focusing more on strength training, Pilates and yoga, and eliminating, for me personally, cardio kind of to a minimum. But there, I think it's so crucial again to say how individual we all are, because I have lots of friends who go for runs several times a week and have a perfectly healthy cycle. So for some women, it's not a problem at all. For me, I think because I already have some sort of hormonal imbalance, and because my body seems to be very, very sensitive to any kind of intensity, cardio just oftentimes really throws it off completely. So if I do cardio, I try to keep it primarily in the first half of my cycle, so during my follicular phase. And then in the second half, that's really where we want to fully prioritize the strength training, the slow, low impact movements, and also Something that I still think is so underrated is walking. How powerful walking is, how many benefits it has for us, not just for our hormones, but mentally, also for longevity. It's one of the best things we can do for ourselves. So getting into consistent, regular walking in our everyday life is super good to do. But again, sorry, coming back to the strength training. When I started doing that, it was so fascinating to me to see and then also learn more about it, because kind of the more muscle our body has, the more glucose it can burn. And so automatically our blood sugar balance improves so much, because the body automatically, if there's especially excess glucose, immediately uses it, and it cannot, float around in the body and spike and crash our blood sugar as much. But what it actually also does is that it increases our growth hormone, and it helps to stabilize our testosterone. And that's actually one of the hormones we haven't really talked about yet. We have been focusing so much on the progesterone and the estrogen. And I think especially testosterone is always so much thought about as the male hormone, but we do have testosterone as well. And it's important for us that it is also balanced, that it's not too high and not too low. It's especially a problem of being too high, again, with PCOS. And so strength training is super good because it helps also to keep our testosterone at a good level. And in general, strength training helps to build a metabolic foundation for our body where it feels safe to ovulate. And so at the moment right now, I do strength training 3 to 4 times a week, and also still adjusting it to my cycle, that in the first half, I push myself a little bit more. So I would maybe go a little bit heavier with the weights or do a little bit longer workouts. And then in the luteal phase, I really try to take it down just a notch and be a bit more also intuitive. Where's my energy at today? How do I feel? And also not having as high expectations to my workout, and just being aware of, okay, probably I'm not as strong as I am in the first half. And also my body is not able to recover as quickly. So our bodies recover much easier and faster in the first half, which again is also why in the second half, taking it down a notch is super beneficial. Point number 6 is something that I still think is getting a little bit underestimated by how much it actually has an impact on our cycle, on our overall health, and that is stress. I think because so often we don't really make the connection that that's what is impacting us so much, because it's also so normal to live a super stressful life, and it's so glorified also, which I think is just such a problem and so annoying. Like, it's so annoying that I think it's getting better, but we're still living in this total society of the more you do, the more kind of worthy you are, and that you are so measured by your output and your performance and how many hours you're able to work and so on. And it's really just causing a life of chronic stress, of so high expectations and demands towards ourselves. And really the impact it has, I think, is we're really not nearly aware of it yet, because chronic stress raises our cortisol to a level where it's just constantly elevated. And like we talked about, we need a balance, right? We cannot have a cortisol level that is constantly high, because what that does is that it automatically then suppresses all the other hormones. We want to have a nice fluctuation where they kind of work together and in sync. And when we're constantly stressed, kind of the same thing happens in the body as when we're under eating, is that it just doesn't feel safe for the body to reproduce. It's becoming less of a priority for the body. So our cycles get longer, they get more irregular, or they disappear completely. The very big problem we of course have is that it's not so easy to just eliminate all stress in our life. So what we need to do is find ways to deal with the stress better and to help our nervous system learn how to regulate more, so that it has a easier time of shifting between our fight or flight and our rest and digest mode, which is basically really what nervous system regulation is about. We don't want to be constantly in a state of calmness, right? We want to be able to also deal with stress and stressful situations and be in that fight or flight mode, but we want to be able to quickly get out of it again and not stay stuck there, because that's exactly also what happens, that we're getting stuck in our fight or flight where the cortisol is constantly high. And the most powerful ways to regulate our nervous system are definitely, number 1, I've talked about it again a million times, yoga nidra. I have recorded a yoga nidra session that's on my Patreon. I'm going to link it for you down below. I'm also planning to record a lot more because I am just really obsessed with it, and it's so powerful and one of the best things to add to your life. Then also, of course, being in nature, breath work, meditation, journaling, and many, many more ways. I actually don't even want to go too deep into all of them right now because there's a whole episode, if you haven't anyways already listened to it, on my podcast about nervous system regulation. So go listen to that if you haven't already, to really make it also one of your main pillars. Having that knowledge is so much power. Point number 7 is definitely the thing I struggle with the most. And it's the whole topic about caffeine and specifically coffee, because unfortunately, there is a lot of research that confirms that coffee specifically is not the best for our hormones, but it definitely depends on the amount. But obviously, like the more coffee, the worse for the hormones, because what it again also does is it raises the cortisol and brings an imbalance into our hormones. And so ideally, we really want to try to lower coffee to a minimum, or what is actually a really good alternative is matcha. Because the thing with matcha is that it contains L-theanine, and that is an amino acid that promotes alpha brainwave activity, which is the same brain state that's associated with calm focus and meditation. So it basically takes the edge off of the caffeine. It enters our bloodstream much slower, so it doesn't create the same spike as coffee, which then also means it doesn't have the same crash, because often when you do drink coffee, you do feel very alert, but then it goes down again and sometimes even lower than where you started energy-wise. And with matcha, you do get the alertness without the cortisol spike, also without the jitters. I definitely notice that a lot if I drink coffee, especially if I drink more than one coffee, that I get very, very shaky. And also reminding me back of what I did back then when I didn't have my period is that I would skip breakfast and have coffee first thing. And that's just really kind of setting our whole day up for not success, and raising that cortisol so much, bringing everything completely out of balance. So yeah, I'm really trying to keep my coffee consumption at a minimum. I try to most days have matcha. Now and then I make an exception and I have a coffee, but then really keeping it at one shot. So I usually have a cappuccino, just one shot of coffee after I had breakfast, keeping it in the morning. So we ideally want to try to have it before 12 p.m. It's not as strict with matcha, again, because it works so differently in the body, but still it's super good to have it kind of as early in the day, because there is so much science that shows that caffeine stays in our body for up to 12 hours. So that's super, super long. And you might not necessarily feel it in the time it takes you to fall asleep, because I don't know how many times I already had that discussion with people that they say, I can easily drink coffee or an espresso shot before going to bed. It doesn't affect my sleep at all. But the thing is, it does, not the time it takes to fall asleep maybe, but the sleep quality itself, which you might not notice, but it does impact it. And that's super annoying, right? We want to get the best quality sleep we possibly can. We really, really also need to talk about point number 8, which is to focus on our gut health. This blew my mind so much when I learned that our gut bacteria directly controls how our body processes estrogen, because there's a specific collection of bacteria in our gut. It's called the estrobolome, and its job is to metabolize estrogen. So to help our body use the estrogen and clear it out properly. And the thing is that when our gut microbiome is imbalanced, especially because of antibiotics or stress, huge impact onto our gut, or poor sleep, or also alcohol literally destroys our gut microbiome. And then what happens is that this estrobolome stops working properly. So what we're going to see is, first of all, irregular cycles. Also things like bloating, more PMS symptoms, heavier periods, more painful periods, mood swings, acne. It has unfortunately so crazy many effects onto the body. So what can we do to keep our gut as healthy as possible? We want to integrate as many fermented foods as we can, ideally daily, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, yogurt. So making sure our gut gets all these probiotics. Also, something not to forget is that we want to have as much variety as possible, because our gut microbiome loves variety. So trying to integrate as many different foods into our diet. And there, I think it's so helpful to know that, for example, also different herbs and spices also bring more variety into our microbiome. And that's just the easiest thing to add to our dishes, right? So in whichever way you can mix it up and change it and use different, especially vegetables and grains and seeds and so on, definitely do that. And overall, I think this is so unnecessary to say, but I'll still say it, just reducing processed foods as much as possible, sugar, cutting that out, and focusing on the whole foods, a whole food diet, and ideally also cooking as much as possible yourself, because it's just really crazy how much stuff is being added into food in restaurants. Because when you think about it, it also makes so much sense. They want you to come back, right? They want you to have the best experience possible. So they don't care at all about maybe adding a little bit sugar here or some artificial stuff there to just make it taste as good as possible. And so yeah, it's unfortunately really not the best for our health. Something else I started to do when I got off the birth control pill was to go to acupuncture. It's fascinating how powerful acupuncture is for so many things, not just for our hormones, but whatever kind of health issue you have, there is for sure some sort of acupuncture needle placement that can work on it and improve it. And so yeah, I was going there regularly, and it was insane because, like I mentioned, I didn't have my period for 9 months. Then I started going to my this date favorite acupuncturist in Copenhagen. I'm gonna link her details down below in case you're in Copenhagen. She's incredible. And I had my first session with her, and 2 weeks later I got my period back. I do have to say, I think it definitely was a combination of everything I did at the time, like all the points I literally just talked you through. But I feel like it was kind of really the last push my body needed to get back into balance. And I've been going regularly the last years, with some in-between phases where I didn't go. I'm actually not going to acupuncture right now because I just haven't found the right one or a good one at the moment. I need to actually really do it because I do so strongly believe in it and felt so positive effects of it. I know it's very costly. It's definitely an investment into your health. So that's, of course, something everyone needs to kind of know for themselves. Maybe also dependent on how big your issues are and how much it impacts you in your daily life. For me, it is such a priority that I am more than willing to spend money on it and then just not spend as much money, for example, on something else. But yeah, right now it's a bit frustrating. I really need to find a good one. If you have any recommendation for a good acupuncturist in Dubai, please let me know. And there are a few other things that in Chinese medicine are recommended to do to improve your cycle. One of them is to have warm foods, especially around your period, because Chinese medicine says that cold food weakens our digestive fire and it disrupts the blood flow to our uterus. And so I try to swap any, frozen smoothies or also raw food. Raw food also counts as cold food, or also like very exhausting for our digestion. So swapping that with very warm, nourishing foods. And that, by the way, also means to avoid ice cold water or iced drinks, which especially during summer is something so nice to have, right? And I mean, it's probably okay to do it now and then, but maybe not trying to have a super ice cold drink as a daily habit, I think is very beneficial. Then keeping our feet warm. That's super interesting, right? It sounds a little bit like an old wives' tale, but in Chinese medicine, cold feet signal poor circulation to the lower body and to the reproductive organs. And so, wearing socks at home or also during bed, which, to be honest, I don't do that, but I often have a hot water bottle in bed, and also avoiding walking barefoot on cold floors or tile floors. And yeah, it's a super small thing, but can, according to Chinese medicine, make a really, really big difference. We have arrived at the last point, number 10, which to me is kind of a mindset that I try to adapt about how powerful our cycle is, and therefore how we want to try to honor it as best as we can. It's actually a really also magical thing when you think about it. And so really trying more to be in tune with myself, to have a look, okay, what cycle day am I actually today, and what can I actively do to support my cycle where I am right now. And for me specifically, it's become super clear that during my luteal phase, I need to remind myself to take it slower, to honor rest, which, like we just talked about, has become a bit difficult in today's time where you're so focused on constantly being productive, but really realizing how productive rest actually is, and also properly nourishing myself, because especially during the luteal phase, you maybe have noticed that also so many times, just how much more hungry we are, because the thing is also the body needs more calories. It's burning more calories, so we also want to give it more, and stepping away from any restrictive mindset we might have during that period. But of course, I think this is also a super difficult topic because Again, coming back to balance, we don't want to eat too little, but we also overall don't want to eat too much. So it is tricky because having too much body fat, for example, brings our whole hormone system also completely out of balance, which is also, for example, especially with PCOS, why so many women notice such a huge difference when they lose a little bit of weight. So yeah, we want to aim for a healthy BMI, figuring out which weight is the healthiest for you. And I can really notice now so clearly what weight kind of is the best for my cycle. So when I gain weight, it starts to get more irregular, and when I lose weight, it starts to get more irregular. So I really figured that out and trying to maintain that weight without, of course, obsessing about it, and trying as best as I can to be intuitive about it, and definitely nourishing myself more in the luteal phase. But I think overall, what I've also just really realized is when you focus on a healthy whole food diet and you also focus on making food yourself, it's so much easier to stabilize your weight, especially also with the protein. Having a high protein diet and focusing on getting enough protein also makes you less hungry and less craving. And same thing also with balancing your blood sugar. The more balanced our blood sugar is, the less cravings we have, the less energy crashes we have. And again, makes it so much easier to be more intuitive and kind of find that sweet spot and that nice balance where we get the exact right nutrients without overeating or undereating. Okay, this was a really long episode, but I so hope it was helpful for you. Let me know. Also, if you have any questions or feedback, leave it in the comments. If you have any specific topic requests for this podcast, also let me know. And I can't wait to see you next week. I'm super excited for next week's episode. So I can't wait to see you there. Bye.